field. We have a few producers and experts to speak with you during this session. And we're going to be starting off with Sheris Strydohorst. Sheri is an agronomy research scientist, with the University of Alberta, Department of Agricultural, Food and Nutritional Science, Faculty of Agricultural, Life and Environmental Sciences. Her work focuses on enhancing the profitability and competitiveness of Canadian agriculture crop producers. She completed her Bachelor of Science, her Master of Science, and PhD at the University of Alberta. She's a member of the Canadian Society of Agronomy, American Society of Agronomy, the Prairie Grains Development Committee, the Alberta Regional Variety Advisory Committee, the Wheat Initiative, Agronomy Expert Working Group member, and Breton Plots Management Team. She was raised in St. Albert, Alberta, and now farms with her husband Shane and her daughter Serena in Nearlandia, Alberta. Welcome, Sheri.
Thank you very much. So can everyone see my screen?
I can. You've got a beautiful photo there, yeah.
Fantastic. So let's get going, and good morning, everyone. So I'm going to start by talking about some of the environmental drivers of Alberta cropping system. So here we've got the classic map of Alberta. And as you move from southeast to northwest Alberta, the soils change, the amount of rainfall changes, the heat, the day length, and the frost-free period changes, meaning producers in different areas of the province have different opportunities and challenges. So some of the crops that are grown, canola is grown widely throughout the province. And then we have soybeans, which are better suited to certain areas of the province than others, particularly those high heat areas. We've got wheat and peas that are grown throughout the province. So when we look at provincial crop production, there's really some interesting trends. And this is a great resource that I particularly like. It's published by Alberta Financial Services Corporation and Alberta Farmer, and it represents crop insurance data. So in Alberta, about 80% of the farmers insure their acres. And so this is quite reflective of what is being done in the province of Alberta. And it documents and gives us a really great data source on what is grown in the province. And there's actually—
Sheri, sir, can I interrupt you just for 1 second, Sheri?
Of course.
Are we supposed to be seeing a map right now? We're seeing a photograph.
You should be seeing a slide that says AFSC Yield Alberta Learnings.
No, we're just seeing a photograph of a beautiful landscape.
Oh, okay. So maybe my internet is not keeping up. I'm going to stop my video and see if that helps a little bit with the bandwidth. And I'll just flip slides here for a second. So do you see a slide that says Yield 2020 Alberta with a flax crop?
No.
No. Oh, darn it.
Might be your screensaver with the thing on.
Yeah, it looks like a screensaver more picture. Now I see your picture.
Okay.
Your lovely face.
And my apologies for this.
Oh, no problem. It happens.
So are you seeing provincial crop production?
Nope, I'm just seeing your profile photo.
Okay, I did send you a link to that has the presentation there.
Okay, let me try and find it here. Sorry.
Is that working?
Yes.
That's better, Sheri. We have your PowerPoint up here now.
Oh, you got it? Oh, good.
My apologies.
Nope, not a problem. There we go.
So, okay.
Thanks, Larry. Okay, we're great.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, so now we've got a boring text slide, and so this crop insurance data documents the crops that we do grow in the province. So 16 crop types are grown on substantial acreage, being wheat, canola, barley, field pea, oat, lentil, flax, mustard, chickpea, dry bean, potatoes, faba bean, sugar beet, rye, triticale, and hemp. So a very diverse number of crops, but our cropping system is dominated by wheat and canola, and these are grown on 37 and 30% of the acres, with barley and field pea being the other dominant crops. So 4 crop types are actually grown on 92% of the acres in Alberta. And we have dryland cropping, and for those of you who aren't familiar with what that term means, it's rain-fed. There's no supplemental water in that cropping system. So 96% of the acres in Alberta are rain-fed and 4% are irrigated, and they have very different production capability on these different field types. So I want to take a look at regional crop production, and we'll compare yields and crop types in southern Alberta in the Tabor and Foremost area, and look at crop production in central Alberta with Olds, Red Deer and Lacombe, and then up in the Peace at Fairview, Falher and Grand Prairie. So this is dryland production in southern Alberta in 2019, which is the data we're looking at. It was particularly dry. And farmers grow a diverse number of crops, but we're going to look at wheat, canola, barley, pea, and oats because those are kind of the top ones. And these crops yielded 21 bushels per acre. But when in the same area, farmers are able to add irrigation, the average yield of those is 90 bushels. So 21 versus 90. So you can see the big limiting production constraint in this environment is moisture. So yields are 429% better when we have irrigation versus dryland conditions. And this southern Alberta cropping district is very distinct with such diversity of crop types, 13 different crop types. The irrigation producers in this area have incredible technology to limit the amount of evaporative loss of the water that is being used and have heavy investments in these technologies. And as we mentioned, the yields are just tremendously better in this area of the province with irrigation, and irrigation is focused on southern Alberta. When we move to the center of the province around Red Deer, Lacombe, Olds, those same crop types, although this is rain-fed crop production, they're yielding 74 bushels per acre, and this is because rainfall is more timely in this area, and the soils in this area are able to hold moisture and make that moisture available for the crop through a longer part of the growing season. And then when we travel up to the Peace region in that Fairview, Falher, Grand Prairie area, those same 5 crop types are yielding 52 bushels per acre. So you can see tremendous differences in production capability, differences in crop type, and it's very tied to the soil and the climate that are in those different regions. So I want to now spend the rest of the time focusing on the cropping traits of our systems here. So in Western Canada, agriculture is very mechanized. We have farms that are very large in scale. There's fewer farmers farming larger acreages, and that means they need to have big equipment to farm this because there isn't a lot of manual labor. Our farmers have very responsible use of biotechnology. Their soil conservation practices are so impressive, and they're not as well praised as what they should be. And I want to do a little bit of that praising in this conversation. And also stewardship, look at the practices they're using. So we're not going to get in big depth on biotechnology, but I think biotechnology can have a little bit of a negative rap. And if farmers were to stop using plant biotechnology and crop production tools in their farming systems, farmers would have to farm the equivalent land of what is in Saskatchewan. So that's a lot of farmland to get the same yield. So biotechnology and crop protection tools allow farmers to get more yield off of smaller land areas. And this means that farmers don't need to drain wetlands and can save wildlife habitats and forests by being more productive on a smaller land base, which is tremendous for ecosystem services and really quite important for our system, for both food production, but also the environment. Now, the big unsung hero, I think, is soil conservation that our farmers use, and minimum till and no-till. So this was a trend that started in about 1985 and has moved onwards. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what it is, you can see this field here. There's standing stubble. So in the fall, before the farmer harvested this wheat crop, with his combine, and that was the last pass over the field. And then here we've got a farmer seeding into that same stubble without working it, without blackening the soil, leaving those roots intact, and holding that soil in place and direct seeding into that standing stubble. Now, it has huge benefits, but I want to look at the adoption because this has been so tremendous for farmers. So in 1991, we're getting the first measurable acres, and by 2011, 56% of the acres in Western Canada were farmed with zero-till and 25% with conservation tillage. So a total of 81%. And there's, I want you to look at this 56% of acres in Canada that are farmed with zero-till. And let's just do a little praising of our Canadian farmers. When we compare that with the US, 37% of reported tillage practices were actually no-till. So you can see here we're going from 56 compared to our neighbors in the south at 37%. So tremendous of adoption of this practice that gives huge benefits. And what those benefits are, they're really economical and environmentally friendly. The first thing is increased yields. Wheat yields under no-till production are 3.5% higher, and lentil yields are 13% higher. And that's because of that soil moisture conservation. And when we looked at those yields in southern Alberta, when moisture is limiting, you can see just how much difference rainfall makes in a system. And because farmers are making fewer passes over their field, it makes a big difference in labor costs. In a zero-till system, a farmer, it's estimated at 3.5 passes at minimum. They have to pass the field with their tractor and seeder to plant it. They will use a herbicide pass, a combine pass, and then either a harrowing pass to distribute residues or a fungicide pass. But compare that with conventional tillage, that farmer has to go over that field an extra 4 times with tillage to get it ready for planting. And of course, that makes a tremendous amount of difference in the fuel that is used to farm that land. So zero-till is using about 20 liters of fuel per hectare compared to conventional till, which is 30. So tremendous fuel benefits as well. You can see why these adoptions have increased so dramatically. And then there's the carbon sequestration piece. We've heard of carbon offsets, and those can actually come from farmers because this system actually maintains and increases the carbon content in the soil. So that benefit as well. And then the next one is soil conservation and reduction in soil erosion. I want to show you an image because I think this is more effective than words. And this here, funnily enough, is a field from the United States. But here we see the field that has been blackened, it's been tilled, and you can see that over winter, because that soil has not been held down, it's all blown into the ditch. That snow along the ditch line is quite dirty. Now this field, same field was not worked, was left for a zero-till system. You can see just how clean that was and how much less wind erosion happened and how much less soil loss. Soil takes incredible amounts of time to build, and you can just from this image see how effective that zero-till is in maintaining soil and reducing soil erosion from wind. Now, a couple minutes here we'll spend on stewardship, looking at, we talked about minimum till and zero-till, how our farmers have adopted that so readily. Our farmers are so clever and are using knowledge-based systems, biotechnology, their equipment technology, and they're concerned about beneficial insects. So a couple of images just before we move on to our farmer producers here. Here we've got a zero-till field that was canola stubble, and it's being planted with a legume crop being faba bean, a nitrogen-fixing crop. So we've got a lot of beneficial practices there where it has reduced fuel use, reduced fertilizer use. Here we've got a picture of sprayer technology, and the fellow here in the brightly colored shirt is Tom Wolf, and he has incredible technology increases in sprayer technology. And here he's talking to a group of farmers where there's a sensor on the sprayer, and the sensor would only spray green tissue or the weeds prior to emergence. So this would reduce pesticide loads on the field. And then here we've got canola. You saw this was grown on 30% of the acres in the province. It is the big biotechnology crop in Western Canada. and it's made tremendous differences on farm in terms of on-farm profitability and healthy oil production. Then we have a crop walk here where farmers are out just in massive amounts to learn about the research that's going on to increase yields and to do a better job at what they're doing on farm and make their systems more sustainable and more productive. Here we've got a fairly fancy weather station because farmers are making their management decisions based on weather conditions, and those will change throughout the growing season, and they will alter their management. So knowing what the weather is and the conditions in field are so important for making management decisions. Here we've got an image of a ladybug, which is a beneficial insect. And when farmers are managing their crops and making decisions on spraying insecticides, they are taking into account counts of beneficial insects and making sure that they're going to do more good to the system than harm. And finally, I've got a picture of a yield monitor here, and nearly all combines in Western Canada are equipped with a yield monitor, so that as a farmer is harvesting his crop, he can see where high yields are, low yields are, and adjust management in that way based on how that part of the field is performing. So tremendous knowledge, tremendous technology, and I'm just so proud of our farming community. So I think we are now going to transition to 3 different farmers. The first one being Andrew Harp. And I'm just going to stop sharing here and allow Andrew to load his presentation and fire up his video. So Andrew is a farmer from Valhalla Centre in the Peace region of Alberta. He's a director with Alberta Canola, and his passion is agriculture, specifically canola and the inclusion of agriculture in education. Take it away, Andre.
See that?
Culture and School Coordinator with Alberta Canola. And with us today, we have our Chair Committee member from the Public Engagement and Promotion Committee, Andre Harp. We're going to speak to you a little bit about canola specifically around this topic. And hopefully you can get a lot out of it. And I'll turn the floor over to Andre. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Pleasure to be here. My name is Andre Harp. I'm a canola grower up in the Peace Country in the northern part of Alberta, and it's a pleasure to be here this morning. I'm a 3rd generation farmer. Our farm's actually been around for close to 100 years, and I am a director with Alberta Canola, and one of the things we like to talk about is canola.
Canadian farmers grow a lot of different crops. I'll bet many of them make their way to your table every day. Out of all of them, canola is the most versatile in your kitchen, and an excellent choice for a healthy diet. Canola is easy to spot by its bright yellow flowers. These beautiful fields swaying in the wind have become a common sight on the prairie landscape. By harvest time, the flowers have been pollinated, formed pods, and filled up each tiny canola seed with up to 43% canola oil. That's a really efficient crop. Canola is 100% Canadian and was first bred on the prairies by scientists at the University of Manitoba and Ag Canada research stations in the late 1960s and early 1970s. The first variety was called Tower. Dr. Balder Stephenson and Dr. Keith Downey used traditional plant breeding methods to produce erucic acid and glucosinolates found in rapeseed, compounds that lack nutritional properties, leaving them with a new crop they called canola. The word canola is a combination of the words Canadian and oil. Pretty cool, huh? Canola oil has exploded in popularity to become one of the most widely used cooking oils in the world. It can be used as a great substitute for almost any other oil. It also provides livestock with great high-protein feed. Canola meal is a byproduct from crushing canola seeds to make canola oil. So there you have it, canola, a crop grown right here in Canada that's being enjoyed by people all over the world.
Canola oil it has a wide variety of uses, but we use the oil mainly for food oils. But it actually can be used as a biofuel to make a better, cleaner burning diesel. And actually, we tend to use what's left over of the canola plant or of the canola seed. It tends to go into feed rations, and actually, it's a very beneficial feed ration for dairy cattle, and it's been proven that it increases the milk production of dairy cattle. So it actually benefits the dairy industry hugely. As you can see, Canada right now is about 33% of the global production. We tend to export most of our canola and we export it as a raw product and as an oil seed, or as an oil. So we have a slide in front of us right now, and I'm not going to go through it. I think you can look it up, but basically what it does is show the comparison of dietary fats that we're able to buy at the stores, and basically where canola oil fits in. So sustainability, what does it mean to you? Everybody has their own ideas of what sustainability is. If you look at myself as a farmer and as a canola grower, this farm has been in my family for close to 100 years. I'm hoping to pass this farm on at some point to one of my daughters. So I do have 3 daughters, and they have expressed some interest in taking over the farm at some point. You know, while everybody's trying to be sustainable, we have to be sustainable just for the fact that, you know, we have to pass this farm on to somebody. And, you know, from year to year, we can't exploit the resources we have in this land. So it's very beneficial just even to us to be able to be sustainable. If you look at, say, 50 years ago, and if you look at a lot of the land, it was worked up, it was tilled up after something was grown on it. That didn't help. That took away with a lot of the organic matter, a lot of the plant matter that was basically worked up, and it was a lot, it actually was detrimental to the soil. So one of the things I do, and one of the things, and I think most other farmers are doing now, is it's called zero tilling. We don't work up the land anymore. And if you were to, if I were to take a field and compare it, you know, before we started doing this, you know, I think you would have trouble finding earthworms. It'd be harder to find organisms. And if I were to go look at a field, you know, that I just harvested this fall, you know, if you were to dig it up, it's actually now very easy to find earthworms. So you get small beetles, you get small insects in the ground, and we don't disturb that anymore. This has actually turned out to be very, very beneficial to the farming industry. And the other thing, one thing we do is, it's really interesting. We look at carbon emissions, carbon sinks, I guess, that we do, and some of the things that we actually do to reduce carbon emissions. So it's really interesting where we talk about carbon being, you know, it's kind of the new buzzword, and it's something that we have to look after the environment. A lot of the things we're already doing as a farm industry, this is normal to us, and a lot of people don't know that. 25 years ago, we were probably getting half the yield that we're getting now. So we're actually taking the same acre, and we're actually doing a lot more with it than we did 25, 30 years ago. So that is good for the environment, because we're getting more out of an acre of land that we normally, or that we have in the past. So and at the same time, we're also doing it in a responsible way and a very beneficial way for the environment, because it gets back to us farmers. We depend on the environment for us to maintain our living. We've got to live with the environment to help the environment work for us. So, but one of the things that's very important is biotech. You know, biotech has actually taken kind of a bad rap in the last few years. And, you know, for the canola industry and actually for farming, it's been hugely important. It's really interesting. And I'll take one small trait that's actually just come about in the last few years, and it's called pod shatter. The pods around the canola seed, and when we were talking about it earlier, where the seed is formed, it's called pods. Looks very much like a pea pod, but a little smaller, obviously. But, you know, there's a trait that was actually introduced a few years ago, and it's called pod shatter. So basically what happened before, we actually went from when the plant was mature, we had to swath or put the canola in rows to be able to combine, and we had to do it, and we didn't have a lot of time because previously the pods would actually shatter, but through innovation and technology, they've actually been able to make that pod a lot stronger. So instead of now having to swath, we no longer have to swath that crop. We actually will leave it straight. We'll leave it standing until it's ready to combine. But one of the reasons we do that is because they've actually been able to develop a pod in some varieties that actually is very hard to shatter or to come loose. So it's reduced our fuel consumption. So it's been a huge boon to being environmentally friendly, because we just use less diesel and we have less passes over the field, which means there's less footprint on our fields. The interesting thing, if you look at, and people talk lots about genetically modified we have no choice. We have to keep up with the population growth. And in order to do this, we need to require faster breeding techniques. And that's basically all genetically modified is. 50 years ago, when they were breeding a plant, it would take maybe 5 years to introduce a trait they were looking for into the plant and bring it to commercial production. A GMO is taking sort of that same process, using some of the technology we have now that's available to us and speeding up that process. So where, it would take 5, maybe 10 years, depending on what you were trying to do to bring a specific trait to where we could actually use it, it shortened the process by a huge amount. The other thing I want to talk a little bit about, and we do have a video available if you want to have a look at it, is bees and canola. We've talked a lot about, it's been in the news a lot about how we're losing our bee population. One of the things, the nice thing, I guess the sweet thing about canola is the amount of canola that is grown out in the country. Now there's just so much canola that it's become very accepted to have a bee farmer, come to a canola farm and say, hey, can I put some hives near your canola fields? And it's a beneficial process for both of us. It helps us pollinate our fields, but at the same time, it gives a wonderful area for bees to survive. I think we've talked quite a bit about what I've done, and this is just a very, very quick overview of what we are. And if you have more questions, please get hold of Tara. We've talked a lot about sustainability and the environment, and I think this is the big thing: is we're working 100% to be mindful of everything that's happening, and we depend on the environment to feed us. Anyway, thank you very much for being with us today. And if you need to talk with Tara or myself, we're easy to get hold of.
Thank you everyone for joining us today, and do reach out to Andre and myself. See you soon. Take care.
Thank you very much. That was great, Andre. So next we have Rodney Volk. Rodney operates a mixed farm south of Highway 3 in the Burdett area of Alberta. His farm consists of irrigated land, dry land, and some native pasture. He grows pinto beans, yellow peas, hard red spring wheat, durum, and has a small herd of cattle. And I see his presentation's up, and take it away, Rodney.
Hey, thank you, Sheri. I'm Rodney Volk. I'm a director on the Alberta Pulse Growers. Next slide, please. So that is approximately where my farm is located. We are located in the Palliser Triangle, which is where the majority of irrigation in Alberta is located. I farm about 460 acres. It's a family farm. We've been on the land for almost 120 years now. I'm 4th generation. Next slide, please. So the farm is about half irrigation. Dry land and pasture make up the remainder. The pasture is, for the most part, what they call short grass, native short grass. And the reason we have left it that way is because it's very rocky, it's in coulees, and it's just better pasture land than it would be for cropping. Next slide. So I grow on irrigation, I grow pinto beans, hard red spring wheat, and hay. I have 2 irrigation systems going. If you look real close, you can see the one irrigation system in there. That's a lateral side roll. And then I also have one pivot. By using so pinto beans on irrigation. And then on the dry land, I have durum and yellow field peas. We no longer do summer follow. When I took over the farming operation, I stopped that practice. We have gone to min-till. I'm not capable of doing zero-till right now, but in the 25 years that I've been doing the dry land, I have noticed that our organic matter on the dry land has gone from 1% to just over 2%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 100%, over 100% increase, and it's huge for water holding and nutrient holding capacity. So there's been a huge benefit to going to min-till and removing the summer fallow. Next slide, please. And one of the reasons we've been able to go to a continuous cropping operation and get rid of summer fallow is because of this unit here, or units like it. Being able to put down pesticides for weed control is a huge advantage. This is one of the first pieces of equipment I use now, and it's used all year long. I know there's a lot of fear in this of the pesticides, but if they're used properly and appropriately, there is very little risk to the food. Farmers are just as concerned with a safe food source as every consumer out there, because not only do we grow the food, we consume the food. And I think that's very important to remember. Another thing this piece of equipment has been able to do by going into a min-till situation on our farm is that the amount of water erosion on fields in the spring and the amount of soil erosion for the rest of the year has decreased greatly. Rebuilding soil matter, as Sheri has alluded to, is extremely difficult, and just seeing how long it took me to get 1% increase in organic matter gives you an idea of the length of time it takes to be able to do this. So by doing this and reducing the number of tillage passes, I'll give you an example. When we were doing conventional tillage on the dry land, so we had up to 3 passes with a cultivator or a noble blade during a summer fallow year, and then at least 2 passes before seeding. So we had 5 cultivator passes. So by the time the crop was emerging, the ground was completely black. We have wind in southern Alberta on occasion and huge dust storms everywhere in the country. By going and leaving the stubble up, all of a sudden wind erosion went almost to 0. And it was because of these sprayers and being able to control weeds without cultivation practices that we've been able to do this. So yeah, I guess I think Sheri has already told us the difference between min-till, no-till, and conventional tillage, but I'll hit on it real quick again. No-till basically means that you might have a harrowing, but basically all your standing stubble is left exactly the way it is, and you seed back into the standing stubble every year. Min-till is doing the bare minimist, so 1 pass usually, just to get your seeding equipment through. On heavy straw years or heavy crop years, you do quite often have to do a pass just to be able to get your seeding equipment through properly. And then conventional tillage, you're starting to look at 4 to 5 passes, black soil, high candidates for wind and water erosion. Next picture, please. Okay, this is actually a picture of pinto bean crop under the pivot irrigation. Why do I have pulses in my cropping plan? First one is their nitrogen fixing. So whether it's on my dry land, my yellow peas, or on my beans, irrigation with my beans, I don't put any nitrogen down with the peas. I put down very little nitrogen down with the beans. The next year on both of those crops, when I go to put in the wheat or durum respectively, my nitrogen application quite often are half of what I would be putting on otherwise. Another reason is disease break. The diseases that are in the wheat are different than the diseases that are in the beans, and so you have a break in there, and there's not a continuous rotation of diseases, and you're not continuously building up upon each other. And there's also a difference in weed control options. So you get rotation in your weed control, which means that you aren't creating super weeds like we now have in kochia and wild oats. And then there's also the fact that you expand your markets. So the beans are going into different markets, and wheat, and quite often if one's high, the other's low, or this year I think they're both high, but that's a rarity and better than them both being low. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of the pivot, actually on beans again. Like I said, we're in the Palliser Triangle. This is a semi-arid area. Yearly rain average is less than 8 inches. So the irrigation helps us maintain higher yields, but the biggest benefit of irrigation is that we get a consistent yield year after year because we're not dependent upon the rain. And we get to control how much water is put on and when the water is put on, which can have huge benefits in terms of disease control and crop growth and timing for insects and that kind of stuff. Next slide, please. Okay, picture of my combine. This does currently all the harvesting on the farm. When I go into different crops, I use different settings on it. So when I'm doing my peas, which are the first crop I take off every year, I have a set of special concaves that I put into this combine. Different settings. I slow rotors down. The same header as I use on the wheat, but other little changes along the way. And then that takes off the peas. And then when I go into durum, I change out certain things on this combine again, speed up the rotor, put in small wire, what they call small wire concaves, do the durum. The spring wheat uses pretty much the same equipment as the durum. But when I go back into beans, I switch out the concaves again, slow the rotor way down. I have a special header to pick up the beans, gentle. Everything slows down. And then, so this combine is pretty much universal in terms of what it can do and how it handles things. So I guess, next slide, I guess if there's any questions or comments, I think I've got a minute or two to answer them.
That's great. Thank you very much, Rod. We actually don't have a whole lot of time for questions right now, but if anybody does have a question related to Rodney's presentation, we can address them during the Q&A panel later on in the day. So Sheri, you can continue with our next snapshot.
And I will introduce Kirby Reddycop. He was raised on a sugar beet farm in Vauxhall, Alberta, where his first jobs were hand weeding and irrigating the beet crop every summer. After leaving the farm for 15 years to pursue other interests, Kirby moved his family back to Vauxhall in 2016 to start their own farm and take over his family's sugar beet production. A lifetime connected to sugar beets and farming has allowed Kirby to see many changes in agricultural production practices, technology, and management, as well as changing public perceptions of agriculture, all of which he is passionate about discussing with others. Welcome, Kirby.
I'm just getting my, hang on. Can't get the right presentation up here for Kirby, hang on. Sorry. There we go.
Yeah, that looks right. You folks can hear, you can hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you great. There we go.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for inviting me to share with you guys today. Yeah, and I guess I'll start by introducing myself a bit. Yeah, Kirby Reddycop is my name. I'm from Vauxhall, Alberta. If you recall the map that Rodney showed us, I thought that was helpful. Vauxhall is about an hour northwest of where Rodney is in Burdett. So
sorry, my slides are going on their own here. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Just ignore the pictures for a minute. And yeah, so Vauxhall, Alberta, part of the Palliser Triangle and part of the area of Alberta cropland that's irrigated. I'm a director for the Alberta sugar beet growers, which is why I was asked to share with you today. And yeah, so we'll go on this slide here.
And I'm just trying to get these timings. No. Sorry, we'll try this.
No,
Is this
you
where
know
we should
what?
be now?
Yeah, that's the one. You bet.
All right.
You know, it doesn't matter how much we rehearse our technology and prepare for it. It always seems to throw a curveball at us. So
Yeah.
yeah, don't worry about it. It's all good.
There you go.
So this is a picture of a couple immigrants in the early 1900s working in a sugar beet field. The sugar beet industry started in 1905 in Alberta. Yeah, as you can see here, it involved a lot of hard hand labor. Conditions were quite a bit different back then. And the interesting thing about sugar beets is they've always been kind of a cash crop, providing a pretty good income. But and that brought a lot of immigrants to southern Alberta, whether to work in the fields or to start a sugar beet farm. So a lot of families in southern Alberta can tie their history back to sugar beets. A big farm back then, a big sugar beet farm back then would have been about 30 acres, which if you're in the city, that's probably hard to know what that means. 30 acres is about the size of 30 football fields, or maybe about 15 city blocks. And now our farms have grown quite a bit. The biggest sugar beet farms in our area are probably about 1,100 acres. So that is quite a change. As with all the other farming industries, we've been changing a lot. And in the past 20 years, the focus has turned a lot to sustainability, not just in terms of economics, but in terms of environmental and social concerns as well. Next slide, please. So a little bit about my story. My family was one of those immigrant families that came to southern Alberta. We came in the 1920s to do hand labor on a sugar beet farm in the Coaldale area, which is about 15 minutes east of Lethbridge. After a couple of years of working on that sugar beet farm, my great-grandfather moved to Vauxhall and bought his own farm. He didn't grow sugar beets right away. My grandfather was able to get back into sugar beets in the 1970s when he bought a farm that came with a sugar beet quota. That was about the time my father was starting to farm, and so my grandfather gave the sugar beet quota to my father, and yeah, my dad sold it to me about 4 years ago. So I've been involved in sugar beet farming for my whole life, but I think I can only call myself really a sugar beet farmer for the last 4 years. I farm about 240 acres of sugar beets. So it's the only crop I produce. I don't have a full crop rotation like Rodney was telling us about. And that's because I rent all my land. I don't own any of my own land. So that means my farm is pretty small by today's standards. And I have to work full time to make ends meet. So I have an off-farm job. Farming is something I do in addition to my full-time job. But I do it because farming is a way of life that my wife and I both love, and we want our kids to be exposed to it. So one of the only reasons I can do this, I can farm and hold down a full-time job at the same time, is some of the new labor-saving technology that's been introduced to farming over the past 20 years. The two primary pieces of technology that have changed my life as a sugar beet farmer are center pivot irrigation and Roundup Ready sugar beet seed. Rodney's already talked to us a little bit about irrigation. He showed us a picture of a lateral side roll wheel line and also his center pivot irrigating his bean crop. Sugar beets take a lot of water, probably close to 3 times the amount of water that Rodney's bean crop is going to take. And so it's very dry and hot in southern Alberta, and so we have to irrigate them. Irrigation used to be done by sprinkler pipes on my farm, but and these sprinkler pipes are long systems of piping that are stationary and that water one section of the field at a time. And so it requires an operator to move them to each section so they can water that section. So it's very labor intensive, and that's what I grew up with. Often I would spend anywhere from 6 to 9 hours of my days in summer moving these pipes around the field so that the whole field could get irrigated. But now irrigation on my farm and on most farms in the area take place by center pivot. which is a system of piping on wheels that moves itself around the field. So it saves almost all of that operator time. It requires an operator to start the system up, to shut it off, and to fix it if it breaks. So it saved us just hundreds of hours a summer, which is obviously why I can also have an off-farm job. Our current sugar beet seed is, though, an even greater leap forward in technology than the irrigation. Sugar beets are slow-growing plants that can easily be choked out by weeds. And so other than irrigation, weed control used to be the most expensive and time-consuming part of sugar beet farming. But now with modern genetics, sugar beet seed has been engineered to resist certain weed-killing chemicals like Roundup, chemicals that we use far less of and are far less toxic than the ones we used to use to control the weeds. And if any of you are interested in having a longer discussion about that, because I think a lot of consumers are, I've got a couple of good illustrations that I can share with you to show you how that is the case. Most consumers think that genetically modified seed means that the food product we produce is also different than it used to be. But in the case of sugar beets, at least, that is not true. As far as sugar beets are concerned, genetic modification only affects the way the plant grows, not what it produces. There's absolutely no difference in the sugar that comes from our beets now than that came from beets 100 years ago. On a molecular level, it is absolutely identical. So in addition to some of this technology that has enabled my family personally to grow sugar beets, these technological advances like irrigation and this new genetically modified sugar beet seed have also increased yields on our farms, which is the amount of food we grow per acre. And the canola growers kind of made that point as well. We are probably producing about 50% more food per acre than we did even 20 years ago, which means that we're way more efficient with the fuel, labor, water, and other resources we're using on our farms. And I think that's great from a sustainability standpoint. Next slide, please. So in Southern Alberta, there's about 180 farm families like mine that grow sugar beets. So we're a fairly small group, probably about as many people as live in a small town. We range in age from our early 20s to our early 80s. And there's often more than one generation working on a farm at a time, which is kind of a great family connection. And it means that sugar beets are a generational crop. It's something that we try to hand on to our kids every generation. And it's important for us from that standpoint to ensure that we're sustainable. While we've always understood as farmers that we have to take care of the land so we can grow quality food, we also know that there's more we can do. And, you know, modern science keeps telling us about some of these things. So that's great. Some of the things we are doing lately as sugar beet growers is attempting to assess and improve our impact on the climate and the environment. We just finished a 2-year program that monitored greenhouse gases on irrigated farms. And we're going to be developing further best practices from this to help ensure that we're doing our part to be environmentally sustainable. Another thing we're doing is trying to improve our transparency and accountability through third-party monitoring. We've just completed a verification audit through the Farm Sustainability Assessment Program, and we're expecting that our industry is going to be at a silver level for sustainability from this globally recognized program. So, you know, because we're a small group, we can be pretty nimble, and I think we're pretty innovative. And we believe that through the use of biotechnology and other techniques, we can be sustainable and continue to grow and deliver safe food to Canadian families. Next slide, please. Here are a couple of the products that come from our sugar beets and that are processed and manufactured here at the sugar factory in Taber, Alberta. I am really proud of the product we grow. I believe it's important for Canadians and especially students to understand where their food comes from. And the sugar beets that we grow and that are processed here in Taber are the only source of 100% Canadian sugar. So that's a pretty great story that we grow it and process it and sell it here in Canada. If you go to your grocery store and you look for products like the ones that are on this slide here, If you look at the black number code on these bags, if you find a number that starts with 22, that means that it is beet sugar that is grown and processed here in the Tabor area. And that is the only locally grown sugar. So I would ask personally for your support by doing that and by sharing that with your students. It's something that we're really proud of. Next slide, please. So yeah, 10 minutes is not a lot of time. I'm going to wrap it up, but here are some additional resources for you as teachers. You can access these websites. There's an email address there. I hope you've been able to see that us as sugar beet growers have a really cool story to tell as a small community of farmers here in Southern Alberta. I love to tell people about what I do. And so please reach out through this contact info, and we'd be happy to arrange a webinar or a presentation for your class, a field trip. It's really easy to social distance in a farm field. And we might even be able to find your kids some sugar-themed snacks for the bus ride home. Next slide, please. We've got a bunch of social media sites. So here is some more contact information that you can take note of. Lots of fun stuff there. Next slide, please. And here is my contact information. My email address is there at the bottom. Please note that it is kirby.redicop@gmail.com. I welcome your emails, and I would be open to having a further conversation with any of you about this. I'd be happy to give you my phone number if you send me an email or anything like that. We can even meet for a coffee. I'd like to talk more about what I do. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kirby. That was fantastic. So thank you to all of our crop presenters for our Ag 101 session. We are going to take a 15-minute break.